But what I want you to understand is that if you get this one thing right, that's the key. It's the key out of suffering. And so let's talk about suffering. If you are, like most people out there, you have been probably really pushed in the last few months. It could be because of financial issues. It could be because of a feeling especially lonely, not being able to meet people that you are close to. It will just be, in general, about feeling alienated because we're constantly and increasingly living in a society that is completely alienating, completely removed from reality, from nature and from our own nature. And perhaps you will have struggled with anxiety, with depression, with all manners of mental health issues. And it's no secret that this year has been especially bad, so to speak, for that. On this channel, we talk about a lot of things. I talk about a lot of things, and these are not original thoughts of mine or original concepts. You can read about them out there in many books. They will have been said by countless people out there throughout the history of mankind. It's nothing new. The message is not new. And yet it's a very hidden message. It's not mainstream. And the reason why it's not mainstream, I feel, is because most people are not interested. They're not interested. And it sounds way too bizarre and irrelevant to their lives. But what I want you to understand is that if you get this one thing right, that's the key. It's the key out of suffering. And so let's talk about suffering. One of the core teachings of Eckhart Tolle, which I think is very relevant to many people's lives, is the idea of conscious suffering. Now, what is that? I could tell myself a lot of stories about things that have happened to me this year. I could tell myself that my life has fallen apart. I don't have any certainties about my future, that I have no economic security, that my plans went out the window, that the person that I am especially fond of is on the other side of the planet and I can't get there. I could tell myself all of these stories. Now, they would be eroding me. Believe me when I say that if I gave in to these thoughts, they would be consuming me day after day after day. We are raised with the idea that if you're not worrying about a problem, you are not a responsible adult. Sometimes if you've ever told people, or if someone has ever said to you, don't worry, people get very defensive and they get very angry. Because we think that there's something wrong with us if we don't worry. We've been taught that it means to show, that it shows that you are, that you're a sensible person. And if you're not worrying, then you're not a sensible and responsible person and you're just denying reality. Well, let me tell you, that's not true. If you stop for a second and observe what your worrying thoughts are doing to you, you will realize that they are not helping you in the slightest. Not only are they not helping, they are making the situation worse. And so there's a massive difference between acknowledging a situation that is challenging, for want of a better word, and actually indulging in worries, in negative thinking. Now, what's the answer to negative thinking? Well, a lot of people say it is positive thinking. Think positive. It's become a very widespread message. And it's nice. It's better than negative thinking. But nowadays, it's interesting that I came across a critique of positive thinking. Apparently, there's a new trend now that is to denounce positive thinking, because when you're trying to think positive, you are denying your inner reality. If I'm suffering right now and I try to think positively, I am effectively ignoring or even trying to suppress my feelings. And that critique is getting there. It's relevant. Because positive thinking, even though it might be a bit better than negative thinking, at the end of the day, is also thinking. And so you're replacing one story with another. And sooner or later, you'll wake up and you'll feel like you're just lying to yourself. You're just trying hard to cover up a negative story with a positive story, but it's still a story. Well, how about not thinking? When I was doing psychotherapy a few years ago, the therapist that was following me, she was a lovely lady, and she was very helpful. And she was very kind, but she did say something that, come to think of it, in hindsight, it reveals what a lot of people think about this idea of no thought. She said, our goal is not to not think. You should definitely, it was something along the lines of, you should definitely be thinking unless you are 6 feet underground. And that is the notion that a lot of people have, that it's impossible not to think. It's impossible. If you're alive, you will be thinking. Well, that's not true. There's a state of no thought that some doctrines like Zen Buddhism, for example, have spoken about, and it's very much real. And I would invite you today to experience it for yourself. And after all, this is what mindfulness is all about, even though it gets misunderstood and it gets misconstrued. That is the essence of mindfulness. It's the essence of meditation. There'll be other techniques that people use for meditation, which may be also of value, may be helpful. But ultimately, I would invite you to try and reach the state of no thought. And when you do that, eventually, you'll realize that there are things that you can't suppress. That some thoughts will arise still. Some feelings will arise. And your suffering, if there is any at all, it will arise. And what we should not try and do is to suppress it. And that is the key to conscious suffering. To suffer consciously means that you see the emotions within that cause you pain, you watch them, and you don't judge them, and you don't try to cover them up with a positive story, and you don't try and repress them. But also, and this is the key, you don't try, or rather, most of us don't try, it just happens automatically. You don't create a story about it. You may say, oh, I'm very, very definitely conscious about the fact that I'm suffering. The thing is, if you're suffering again and again, and there is no change in your inner state, then most likely you're not conscious that you're suffering. You are carried away by your suffering. You are identified with it. You are identified with a story that your mind has created about the situation that you are confronting. So in my case, I'm here and I could create all manners of stories about what is happening right now in the world, what is happening, how it's affecting me. And I could go with that. And sometimes I do. I wake up and my mind tells me, blah, blah, blah. Do you know that? What are you going to do? What are we going to do? The world is going insane. And if that happens, just watch it. Listen to your mind and what it tells you, but don't go there. Just let it go on its own. And stay present. How do you stay present in those situations? Well, right now I'm drinking a cup of tea and I'm talking to you. Well, I'm talking to my camera and some of you will be listening. And if a story arises in my head right now, like the fact that the past few days have been dramatic, that people have done things to me, that I don't know what's going to happen in a month's time, that my beard is not it's not groomed properly, or that my camera is highlighting all the imperfections and spots on my skin. Just watch that and keep drinking your tea. There's a saying, and I think this one is from one of Alan Watts' talks, but it's not his own quote. Relevant, really, whose quote it is. And it's, if you think that you're enlightened, go and live with your family. I'm not sure if it's exactly like that. I think I'm paraphrasing it. It might be a reworded version of that. But you know, the idea with a lot of people that try to be spiritually free is they seek solitude. And I love solitude. I prefer to live alone. I think it's a great blessing. I always say, and I've probably written somewhere in my blog, and if I haven't, I will, silence. I always say silence is key. You have to find silence. You have to find silence. But sometimes life does not afford us that luxury of silence. If you're alone right now, if you're not in a relationship, consider yourself very lucky. It's a blessing that life is bestowing upon you. But if you're not, and you can't get away, you have to make the most of what life has thrown in you. And sometimes, or rather should I say all the time, If you're experiencing something, it's because that's what you need in that particular moment. And for me, the past few months, for example, there's been situations where I very much wanted to be alone and I couldn't. And there's two things you can do in that situation. You could curse your present life and hate it because what you want is not happening, or you can just accept what's happening and see if you can learn from it. And trust me, the relationships with other people, they will test you. They will test your degree of consciousness, your degree of how mindful you are, how liberated you are, so to speak, from compulsive thinking, from reactivity, from reacting unconsciously. They will do. And if you can take advantage of that by being conscious, even if you suffer, you haven't failed. You haven't failed. If you're conscious, you haven't failed. Even if you find yourself reacting, even if you find yourself having a negative emotional reaction or manifestation of negative feelings, just be conscious of it. Just watch it, be silent and watch. And that's all you have to do. Just be silent and watch. And that, my friends, will be probably 10 times more effective than living as a hermit on the Himalaya for 7 years, like Brad Pitt did. If this whole mindfulness / meditation / spirituality ordeal is new to you, then well, if you're still listening, then chances are that this will very much resonate with you. But it might sound a bit weird. If you're not unfamiliar at all with mindfulness and meditation, then you might experience what sometimes happens to me, and it's that little voice in the head telling you, you should know better, you should not have a reaction, you should not feel this way. And you want to watch out for that little voice. You want to watch out for it. Because the key here is not to feel nothing. Perhaps one day you will. Perhaps one day you will be completely free of emotions and you'll, be at peace 24/7. But for most of us, the key is not that. The key is not to feel nothing or think nothing. The key is to be conscious of what happens. Whether it be negative thoughts, negative feelings, and any reaction that might follow from that. I think today I have nothing else to say about this topic. If you found this video value, consider subscribing. That's my pitch at the end of every video. It's kind of become like a set phrase. Consider subscribing and I'll see you next time. Cheerio!